Howdy. Howdy. How's everybody today? Good. I'm really glad you're here. This is the 12th annual Reading Discovery Program at the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum. We're being video conferenced today. We have friends that are watching us right now in Ottawa, Canada, and in New York State. And they're going to be asking questions, and so I don't know, and they're waving to us on the monitor here. I don't know if we can pull this up for everyone to see, but there they are. They're waving right now back to you. So what I'd like to do, for those of you watching in New York and Ottawa, Canada, how we greet each other on the Texas A&M campus is that we say howdy. Now, you guys did okay, but since you got to holler as if nobody in Canada and New York can hear you, we're going to send our biggest howdy to our friends on the count of three. You ready for that? I love the enthusiasm. All right, here we go. All right, on the count of three, we're going to holler them another big howdy. Y'all get ready to listen. 1, 2, 3. There you go, and with that, we welcome them into Aggie Land, USA, and we're grateful that you're here. I'll be your moderator today. I've had the privilege of being part of the program for many years here. My name is Mike Wright. For a long time, was with the TV stations here and in Waco, and now I work for athletics at Texas A&M University. I've been out there for about a year, and it's a privilege to be this close to this facility all the time. We are here to honor the First Lady Barbara Bush's Literacy Foundation and her belief that reading is something you should do in your everyday life. The program today focuses on the role of President George H.W. Bush earlier in his career, representing the United States from 1971 to 1973 as UN ambassador and from 1981 to 1989 as vice president, using travel diplomacy to help resolve issues arising in India. We will reflect on the important value of our nation of diplomacy. We have a video clip at this time we'd like to share of President George H.W. Bush's October 1st, 1990 at the UN General Assembly in New York City. Let's roll the video.
Well, Mr. President, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary General and distinguished delegates to the United Nations, it is really a great privilege to greet you today as we begin what marks a new and historic session of the General Assembly. My congratulations to the Honorable Guido DeMarco on your election, sir, as President of the General Assembly. And on a personal note, I want to say that having witnessed the unprecedented unity and cooperation of the past 2 months, that I have never been prouder to have once served within your ranks and never been prouder that the United States is the host country for the United Nations. "45 years ago, while the fires of an epic war still raged across 2 oceans and 2 continents, a small group of men and women began a search for hope amid the ruins. And they gathered in San Francisco, stepping back from the haze and horror to try to shape a new structure that might support an ancient dream. Intensely idealistic, and yet tempered by war, they sought to build a new kind of bridge, a bridge between nations, a bridge that might help carry humankind from its darkest hour to its brightest day. The founding of the United Nations embodied our deepest hopes for a peaceful world."
All right, so that was the talk that President Bush made so many years ago. This year we join in celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations by learning more about how all of us play a role in this, in contributing to building peaceful relationships. That happens through our personal diplomacy and understanding issues of our communities that we live in, as well as other countries around the world. There's a new interactive learning game app. It's called Presidential Travel Mission India. We'd like to invite you after this is over. I think your teachers may have the information for you. We'd like to invite you to download that online from the Apple Store or Google Play. Enjoy the free learning game app about modern India with historic photos attached. David Scheller of EduWeb provided this video clip to explain more about what you can download. Let's roll that.
Presidential Travel Mission India puts you in charge of a State Department mission to India to explore and research and plan the itinerary for a presidential visit. You can take inspiration from Vice President George Bush's trip to India in 1984. Your assignment is to explore widely, meet lots of people, visit lots of places, and choose the very best ones for the presidential itinerary. Each location has a star rating, so you want to choose the best ones while also having a lot of variety. Here's a map of India with our itinerary, blank at the moment until we start filling it out, and all these red diamonds are places that we can visit. The Taj Mahal is one of the most famous landmarks of India. Shall we add that to the itinerary? I think so. And look, we've unlocked a Bush card. This is a set of 10 cards that you can unlock as you play the game that commemorate George and Barbara Bush's visit to India in 1984. So there's many places you can visit and people you can meet, and you unlock more as you play the game. And we've unlocked another Bush card, meeting with Rajiv Gandhi, who was a member of parliament and soon became prime minister. So now we're heading west to Jaisalmer, which is a city out in the Thar Desert. And at some of these places we get quizzed about things we've learned about India during our travels. So as we explore the country, we can add more and more events to the itinerary, and if we want to change our mind, we can remove them, add them later, until we're done. So let's fast forward through more gameplay here just to get a glimpse at more places you can visit in the game. And now, should we submit our itinerary? Sure. So here's the evaluation. This is a 2-star itinerary. It's pretty good, but could have been a 3-star if we'd been a little more thoughtful with our choices, I guess. It does have good variety. And we unlocked 5 out of the 10 Bush cards. And we can take a look at them all here. So after playing the game, or before, you can do it before or after, you can browse this scrapbook about George and Barbara Bush's visit to India in 1984. And here's the actual briefing book that the people who planned the Bush's trip to India put together based on their research to describe all the places that the Bushes would go and all the people they would meet and things they had to know in order to have a good trip. It has articles about their visit and places they went and even the menu from some lunches and dinners that they had there. So that's a sneak peek at the game. You can play it online at presidentialtravelmissionindia.com or find it on the iOS App Store or the Google Play Store for Android.
All right, so I'll give you an idea of what's available once you download that. And before we start with the introductions, here's a little personal word from me to you. I promise you, this may not make much sense now, but I'd like for you to pay careful attention to it. First, time really flies when you hit about the age you are. I remember when I was sitting in assembly in my small hometown school of Mejia, Texas, about 80 miles from here. And I remember getting some really neat programs that I was able to attend, but at the time, I didn't appreciate it. So let me tell you right now, to me, it is very different to be in this place, at this event, without former First Lady Barbara Bush sitting right there in that middle chair. For years, I had the privilege of listening to her speak, maybe to interpret some of the questions that had a bad connection for wherever they were. And I didn't take that moment for granted. Those opportunities don't come along often. And so you're in a place where President Bush and Mrs. Bush were walking around just in recent history, just in 2 to 3 years ago. They were here making this part of their routine. So you're in a very special place today. And as you listen to Ambassador Sieve, Dr. Banks speak, you need to listen to the message they have, because it may not mean much now, but we hope you'll always remember the day that you spent this moment at the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum, and that you'll bring other people back. And when you have kids of your own, I hope that this is a special memory and you'll bring them back here to visit again. So let's do some introductions. We first welcome Dr. Julie Baker Fink. She is president of the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation. The vital organization began with an initiative by Mrs. Bush to support and help to increase literacy. We do thank you, Dr. Julie Baker Fink, for joining us today. Thanks for being here. We're also glad that our administrators and our teachers have joined us today from many local schools. They are here with us. You are very much appreciated, and we'd like to acknowledge several teachers and administrators. But first, for all of you that work in public school, you're the most underpaid profession in the world. I'm just letting you know. You deserve a huge raise right now. Now, first of all, we're going to find out who's in the house today. I understand that Mumford may be here. Mumford's in the house. Are you here today? All right. We'd like to say welcome to Superintendent Blaine M. Davis and the Mumford ISD reading teacher, Nicole Watson. Would you please stand at this moment? There they are. Thanks for being here. We also want to congratulate you on being a blue ribbon school as well. We know that that's not easy, but congratulations on your accomplishment. Do we have anybody here from Jane Long Intermediate School? Yes, sir. All right. Bryan ISD representatives, Crystal Goodman is Executive Director of School Leadership. Dr. Leslie Holtkamp is Director of Curriculum and Instruction. Brandy Morley is a Secondary English Language Arts teacher. Janice Kinley heads up Social Studies and World Languages. Mrs. Cody Satterfield, Jane Long Intermediate School Principal. They clap for you now till they get called in there in bad trouble, and they don't clap as loud when that happens. And Mr. Clinton Ron, the pre-AP 6th grade Social Studies in choir program. So Jane Long Intermediate with the Bryan ISD, thank you so much. One more big round of applause for all your friends from Bryan today. And then finally, I don't know if you recognize or not, but they're all kind of dressed the same today. The International Leadership of Texas School. Are you in the house today? There they are. Let's do this just a tad differently. If you can, when I call your name, stand and remain standing till all of you have been recognized. There are a few here. Dr. Matilda Orozco, Houston Area Superintendent in College Station. Principal, Dr. Heather McMahon. Dr. Paige Niemeyer, 7th grade level administrator and science teacher. And Joseph Hastings, the 6th grade level administrator and science teacher. I don't know why Joe always got the biggest applauses of whatever event that he attends, but he's always a popular guy. So we're glad all of you are here today. A special thank you as well to Dr. Rupa Gear, the board chair of iEducate and vice president of UNA Houston, as well as to Sam Merchant, who is the senior advisor to Congressman Al Green and a former board member of UNA Houston. Both of you, thanks to you for being here today. We appreciate your attendance. All right, by the way, those two had a special job you're going to hear the results of in a few moments from now. They both provided Hindi translations of 2 texts that are being read today in Hindi. Not a language of our own, but certainly something you need to know about, and we thank you so much. The Education Department would like to thank Josh Gorbett, who's the news director of KBTX, Kewan Brown, the news operations manager at the station, for their live streaming and archiving of this program today. Our thanks as well to Connect to Texas for the distance learning outreach connections that have our friends from New York and Canada on the line with us today. All right, so student readers are going to read you passages that we mentioned a little bit earlier, and we're going to start with the 7th grade at Mumford ISD. They're going to read highlights about the United Nations as well as UN Ambassador George Bush. They are Allison and Allie. Our first student reader would be Allison from the Mumford ISD. It's okay if you clap for her. Make her feel welcome.
We are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations this year. The United Nations Charter explains its purpose: worldwide peace and security, to develop relations among nations and to urge cooperation. Currently, 193 countries are United Nations members and meet in New York City. Leading each nation's delegation is an ambassador. The United States ambassador is chosen by the serving American president. In the 1970s, this was a diplomatic job held by George H.W. Bush, who later became the 41st president. Initially, he was advised it was policy for other ambassadors to call on him. The United States never called on anyone. Bush reversed that policy and made a practice of calling on the ambassadors of smaller countries. His supportive wife, Barbara Bush, felt her husband's UN service taught her that a touch, many smiles, much interest, and lots of honest affection were a universal language.
And next up, we will have our second student reader, who's Allie from the Mumford ISD. Allie?
United States ambassadors represent the U.S. government on behalf of the President and hold cabinet status. Their work supports current interests in foreign policy of the administration. I was there as an advocate, not an apologist for my country's policies, remarked Bush in confirming. He knew exactly where he and the United States stood. President Bush spoke of memories, the human moments and the humorous moments. Once he was late, the speaker paused and said with great courtesy, I welcome the representative of the United States, and for his benefit, I will start my speech all over again. At that moment, differences didn't matter. The universal groan and then laughter united all. He remembers the mutual respect among all who served proudly and the almost endless work followed by informal discussions.
Great. Thanks, Allie. Next, two students are going to read some reflections from President Bush while he made as the UN ambassador at the UN. And these student readers are from Jane Long Intermediate School, the Bryan ISD. They are Jessica and Hayden, and they're in the 6th grade. Jessica?
Historian John Meckham wrote Destiny and Power, the official biography of President Bush, and said, Bush sensed that transitions in public life would be easier by courting those with whom you had worked and saying thanks with whom that you had worked, like the oil business, like the Congress. The United Nations job was one in which relationships mattered. He worked hard to make new friends at the United Nations while maintaining two geopolitical positions that existed following World War II. While the United Nations were changing attitudes toward emerging nations, historian Jeffrey Engel explains the Americans would thereafter have to be more responsive to global opinion. The final lesson Bush took from the United Nations was this. In my view, diplomacy was best built on a foundation of respect rather than bullying.
Thank you. Hayden?
Discussing personal diplomacy while United Nations Ambassador President Bush explained, the United Nations is a political forum. One day there's a vote on one question, another day there's a vote on another question. I believe firmly that many of these ambassadors had flexibility on how they were going to vote, and if you had a good relationship with them, they would indeed vote with you. Later, as President Bush, he preferred military action to take place under the authority of the United Nations with other states participating. This would lessen international criticism while extending his diplomacy of inclusion. When considering all of the valuable lessons learned at the United Nations, President Bush said, the heartbeat of the United Nations is a more quiet conviction that would make the world more peaceful, more free.
Thanks, Hayden. All right, let's look now at some travel missions while he was Vice President George H.W. Bush as he traveled on behalf of President Ronald Reagan. Student readers are now from the International Leadership of Texas School here in College Station. From the 6th grade, Ava will read in English and then Rian in Bengali, the same texts. From the 7th grade, Brianna will read in English and Samyan in Hindi. We will start with Ava, who will read in English. Ava?
During nearly 2 years of service at the United Nations, the Bushes used their personalized diplomatic approach. They made new friends from many countries and with whom they stayed in contact with. These friendships would make a vital difference in bigger future challenges. In the 1979 primary political campaign for the presidency, candidate Ronald Reagan selected George H.W. Bush to be his vice president. Political elections and voting results in 2 national campaigns, in which George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan got the privilege to lead our country for a total of 8 years. Helping along in the campaigns were Barbara Bush and their 5 adult children and spouses. Barbara Bush remembers campaigning hard for the Reagan-Bush ticket, quote, in backyards, ballrooms, courthouses, bowling alleys, at a cider and donut farm, hot dog plants, retirement homes, high schools and colleges, you name it, we were there, end quote.
All right, and now reading in Bengali is Riyan.
জাতিসংঘে প্রায় 2 বছরের থাকাকালীন সময়ে রাষ্ট্রপতি বুশ এবং তার পরিবার তাদের কূটনৈতিক অভিজ্ঞতা কাজে লাগায় বিশ্বের বহু দেশের বিভিন্ন গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ব্যক্তিদের সাথে বন্ধুত্বপূর্ণ সম্পর্ক গড়ে তোলে, যাহা পরিবর্তে তাদের বহু চ্যালেঞ্জ সমাধান করতে সাহায্য করে। 1979 রোনাল্ড রেগান ইউএসের প্রেসিডেন্ট জর্জ ডব্লিউ বুশ কে তার উপর রাষ্ট্রপতি হিসাবে বেছে নেন এবং পরবর্তী 8 বছর তাদের জনগণের ভোটের মাধ্যমে নির্বাচিত হয়ে দেশ শাসন করেন। রাষ্ট্রপতি বুশ নির্বাচনে বুশের ওয়াইফ বারবারা বুশ এবং তাদের 5 বয়স্ক সন্তান অনেক কঠোর পরিশ্রম করেছিল। রেগান বুশের নির্বাচন পরিচালনার কথা বলতে গিয়ে বারবারা বলেন, আমরা মিনিসর উদ্যানিয়া, কমিউনিটি সেন্টার, আদালত, বিভিন্ন খেলাঘর, মিষ্টির দোকান, বিভিন্ন স্কুল এবং ইউনিভার্সিটি সহ এমন কোনো জায়গায় নিয়ে যে আমরা জানি।
Before we go to our next reader, Mrs. Satterfield, are you the one that said you'd like to get up now and interpret what he said, or did I misunderstand you? You would not like to do that. All right, just thought I'd give you the opportunity anyway. All right, we will move on now to a couple of more readings from the International Leadership of Texas. We will start with 6th grade student Brianna.
Vice President Bush traveled an estimated 1.3 million miles on behalf of the president. This is a distance equal to 54 trips around the planet Earth or 55 trips to the moon and back. The Bushes visited all 50 states and 65 foreign countries, many of them multiple times. A 1982 trip to China renewed a friendship made with Deng Xiaoping while being Ambassador Bush at the United Nations, and demonstrated U.S. support to China's economic reforms. In 1984, the Bushes went to India to visit Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and help resolve regional issues. On a 1982 trip of Africa, Vice President and Mrs. Bush met with Zambia's President Kanda. In 1985, the Bushes visited relief camps in African nations suffering from famine and drought. These were among many significant diplomatic trips made by Vice President and Mrs. Bush to support United States relationships worldwide.
And now reading in Hindi will be Semyan.
उपराष्ट्रपति बुश ने राष्ट्रपति की ओर से करीब 13 लाख माइल्स यात्रा की है। यह दूरी धरती के चारों ओर 54 बार घूमने की बराबर होता है और चंद्रमा की तरफ और वापस 5 बार की होता है। बुश परिवार ने 50 राज्यों और 65 विदेशी मुल्कों की कई बार यात्रा की है। संयुक्त राष्ट्र संघ की राजदूत के रूप में 1982 में हुआ चाइना की यात्रा ने डेंग शाओपिंग के साथ बनाया मित्रता की नवीकरण किए और चाइना की आर्थिक पुनर्निर्माण के लिए अमेरिका की समर्थन जताया। 1984 में बुश परिवार भारत के प्रधानमंत्री इंदिरा गांधी से मिलने के लिए गए और क्षेत्रीय मुद्दे को सुलझाना मदद किया। 1982 में हुआ चाइना की यात्रा ने उपराष्ट्रपति और श्रीमती बुश ने जाम्बिया की राष्ट्रपति कुंडे के साथ मुलाकातें किए। 1985 में बुश परिवार ने सूखे तथा भूखमरी से प्रताड़ित अफ्रीकन राज्यों के सयाहता के शिविर में दौरा किया। ये थी उपराष्ट्रपति तथा श्रीमती बुश ने संयुक्त राज्य संघ अमेरिका की संबंधन विश्वव्यापी करने के लिए किया कुछ महत्वपूर्ण किनेटिक भ्रमण।
Let's give all of our readers one more big round of applause for the job they did today. Interesting hearing those passages about the career of George H.W. Bush and all that he has done as he valued the importance of diplomatic reason to get things accomplished. We're honored to have a couple of special guests, as we have mentioned just a little bit earlier. First of all, Ambassador Sichan is with us. He's personally served on behalf of President George H.W. Bush in the 41st administration. He was a White House Assistant for Public Liaison as well as at the U.S. State Department. He later served on behalf of President George W. Bush in the 43rd administration as United Nations Ambassador, participating fully in travel missions. Ambassador Sichan, welcome.
Thank you, Mike, for the kind introduction. I thank Shirley Hammond for putting this event together. It's a privilege for me to be with you here today. Each time I'm at the Bush Library, I say to myself, I'll be back. We are going to take a little journey back 30 years ago on January the 20th, 1989. George Bush put his left hand on two Bibles held by Barbara Bush. One was used by George Washington in 1989, and another Bible belonged to his family. We call this From George to George, from George Washington in 1789 to George Bush in 1989. He raised his right hand and he repeated after Chief Justice Rehnquist. He said, I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully, I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and that I will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. And became 41st President of the United States. I have studied a little bit of the history of the presidency. I have not found one person who is more qualified to occupy the White House than George Bush. As you can see, he had a very distinguished career from the House of Representatives to become the ambassador to China, the chairman of the INC, director of the CIA, and finally vice president of the United States for 8 years before I became president. Of all the people who occupied the White House, George Bush was the most qualified, in my opinion. We had a lot of military leaders in the early years. We had governors, we had lawyers, but only a few were diplomats. I put Ben Franklin up there because he was the first American diplomat, the first ambassador to France. So only one was a skydiver. As you can see, he said, just because you're an old guy, you don't have to sit around drooling in the corner. Get out and do something. Get out and enjoy life. My wife is from Pampa, Texas. How many of you know where Pampa is? Bravo. Pampa is in the panhandle of Texas. It's, they say there's nothing between Pampa and the North Pole. Except a barbed wire fence and 2 strands are down. But Martha and I were introduced to the Reagans in the 80s, and we kept receiving invitations from the White House, but none topped this one on July 13, 1988. I was a guest of President Reagan and Vice President Bush, and that's when it was the first time for me to meet the president or the future president. When I was standing there in the Rose Garden, the thought never crossed my mind that a few months later I would be working at the White House for the 41st president. As it turned out, after Bush was elected, he asked me to go and work for him at the White House. I went to work to the White House on February the 13th, 1989, exactly 13 years from the day I jumped off a truck in Cambodia, in the Cambodian jungle, in 1976. So flash back to the 70s. I was growing up in Cambodia. When Cambodia was still under the French rule, I grew up speaking French and Cambodian. I ate a lot of French food, which was a good cuisine anyway. and everything was a symbol, France was a symbol of modern civilization for us until 1953, when Vice President Mrs. Nixon came to visit. Our teachers told us that there was another country, much bigger and farther away than France. It's called United States of America. That was the first time I learned about the United States of America. My father was a police chief, but he died when I was 9 years old. So my mother brought me up. She told me, no matter what happens, never give up hope. So hope kept me alive in some of the most difficult circumstances. In the 70s, Cambodia was involved in the Vietnam War. We were fighting against the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese, and the Khmer Rouge. On April 10, 1975, President Ford gave an address to the joint session of Congress. He said, for this administration, the time is short, and the options are few as far as Cambodia and South Vietnam are concerned. 2 days later, I was told by the U.S. Embassy to be at the embassy within 1 hour if I wanted to be airlifted out of Cambodia. I had been working in very dangerous circumstances, trying to save the lives of hundreds and thousands of people who fled the war-torn countryside to seek safety and shelter in the capital and the provincial cities. I had a meeting that day with the governor of a province in order to save the lives of some 3,000 families. I decided to go to the meeting. When I got to the embassy, I was told that the last helicopter had taken off 30 minutes before. So I missed the U.S. helicopter by 30 minutes. 5 days later, the Khmer Rouge came in and they turned the country upside down. They killed anybody who wore glasses, a sign of education. They killed teachers, nurses, government officials, military personnel, anybody who had not been with them during the so-called revolution. I threw away my glasses. My mother gave me her wedding ring, her scarf, and a bag of rice. She told me, run, no matter what happens, never give up hope. So I rode a bicycle for a few weeks crossing Cambodia. I was captured near Thailand. They tied my arms behind my back, and they were going to kill me because they suspected that I was trying to cross the border to Thailand, which was my intention. But a truck driver whom I had met a few days before saved my life. He told them that I was an innocent person going around looking for my family. For the next year, I was put in forced labor camps. We were forced to work 18 hours a day. We were given a bowl of rancid soup a day to eat. At night, when I went to sleep, I never knew if I would be alive. When I woke up, I said I would make it to freedom. On February the 13th, 1976, I was alone at the back of the timber truck. I jumped off the truck. I began to run, to crawl, to walk for 3 days, having nothing to eat or to drink. I fell in a booby trap. I was wounded, but I was able to pull myself out and continued to limp along until I got to Thailand. After a brief stay in a jail for illegal entry, they sent me to a refugee camp. There were some 3,000 refugees suffering from mental depression because they sat around all day feeling sorry about the past and worrying about the future. I organized English classes. It was a win-win proposal because many of them were going to go to an English-speaking country. So they were able to get some English, and they were able to take their minds off the worries and the sorrows. On June 4th, 1976, I arrived in Connecticut with my mother's scarf, an empty rice bag, and $2. I wanted to adapt to America quickly so that America would adopt me. So I did everything that came my way to the best of my ability. I picked apples in Connecticut. I drove a taxi in New York. Then I went to Columbia with a full scholarship. Then, as I said a minute ago, Martha and I were introduced to Reagan. Then we were invited to the White House. That's how I met President Bush. So back to 1989, when I walked in to work at the White House, as I mentioned a minute ago, it was exactly 13 years from the day I jumped off that truck in the jungle of Cambodia. That I made it that far in such a short time could happen only in America. And that was a great tribute to George H.W. Bush. Working at the White House is very special for anybody. But for me, it is more special because 13 years before that, I was running for my life. And now I was sitting at the White House, seeing history taking shape in front of my eyes. Under George Bush, a lot of historical events took place. The Cold War ended. Germany became united. The Soviet Union fell apart. Eastern Europe became free. And George Bush handled the post-Cold War effectively without a shot being fired. I have learned a lot from him as a president, as a human being, especially. So working at there is very special, but being with him in the Oval Office, like in this picture, is even more special. And being alone with the president in the Oval Office, that was the most special moment. He has done a lot of things for the United States of America and for the world in one term, more than most have done in 2 terms. This is the meeting that took place in the residence of the White House with the Dalai Lama. And that made the Chinese very unhappy because they never recognized the Dalai Lama. But President Bush felt it's important to meet with him. He won just a Nobel Prize. He is a very important human being in human rights. So that was George Bush. He's strong on principle. He is doing everything that is right. And he's very competitive. I was given access to the tennis court, and one day he came to see me and to scout me how good I was. Then he came on the court, he said, "Sichan, you see this? I just had it paved last week." He was talking to you like you were his buddy. It was a privilege for me to work for 2 presidents named Bush. Both are naturalized Texan like me. I like to say I used to work behind the bushes. All of this, as you know, George Bush was the only president or person alive whose name was on the ship. Normally they don't name a ship or for anybody until the person is dead for 10 years. But here you have the USS George H.W. Bush. And I've been blessed to come here many times. As I mentioned a minute ago, one day I came on a motorcycle and I wrote to him. And he said, "You came here on a motorcycle. I envy you." And this is the man who jumped off the plane. He envied me for riding a motorcycle. All of this is summarized in the book Golden Bones, which are the words Cambodians use to describe somebody who is very blessed, who is very lucky. And I'm very proud to say that mine is the only one with the quote from President Bush. What a story, what a life. In 2014, I decided to publish a book in his honor about socks, because he's been carrying these crazy socks, and you can see I also carry crazy socks here in his honor. So it's called Golden Niners. It's all about socks, all traveling all around the world, like Flat Stanley, remember Flat Stanley? Flat Stanley traveled around the world, and Crazy Sock also traveled around the world. He loves it. In October 2018, I went to Iraq to visit some churches in Basra, in Kirkuk, and in Baghdad, Presbyterian churches. And I was quite heartbroken to learn that 80% of the Christian population in Iraq has lost about 80% of the Christian population. When I came back, I got a memo from Gene Baker, who was chief of staff to President Bush, she wrote to 5 of us, telling us that we have been invited to fly on Air Force One should the president die. And I was very honored, very humbled to be among those 5 people. I've known the president only for 30 years, that's long enough, but the other 4 people have known the president longer, 50 years, 60 years. So I had to go to Guatemala, and I took a clue from Mrs. Thatcher, who traveled around in the final months of President Reagan with a black dress. So I went to Guatemala carrying a black suit, a white shirt, and a dark tie. In case the president passed away, I would be able to get to Houston quickly. Gene Memo described precisely what to do. Day 1 he died, day 3 Air Force One arrives in Houston, and that time we flew to Washington. I pray that if I were really chosen to be on that plane, I would be on that plane. So when I came back, he was still alive. Then I went to Washington for a function. I told his daughter, Doro, that I would be coming to Washington. She said, let's have lunch. So we set lunch for December 1st, 2018. On November 30th, I sat at the airport in San Antonio. I got a message from her. She said, I am sorry, I have to cancel lunch tomorrow because my dad is not feeling well. I'm flying to Houston. So she was flying to Houston, I was flying to Washington. When I arrived in Washington, I learned that he passed away. So I came back to Houston, and this is the first cartoon I saw about his passing away. And we got another one when Mrs. Bush passed away. On December 3rd, we all went to his office in Houston on Memorial Drive, and this is the Christmas tree that we saw in his office. You recognize the angel? That's Barbara Bush. That morning, we just went according to the plan. Everything was so precise. It's a military operation. This funeral plan has been in place for many years. One of the first things a president after his election is to plan about his funeral. And this has been revised many times, and they had a good run when Mrs. Bush passed away in April. So it was boom, 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 boom. We went to we boarded Air Force One, and there I was in the hallway, and Sully the dog, if you haven't seen him yet, he's right here at the museum. Here's a statue there. Sully spent 6 months, the last 6 months of President Bush's life with him, since June until December. So Sully walked back and forth. He looked at me, and he, just like all of us did, animals have the same feeling. Arrival in Andrews, precisely at the time that was planned in the schedule. This is the Capitol Hill service, and I was proud to be there. It was a blessing for me to be part of this process. So I dedicate this presentation to all of you, but most of all to George and Barbara Bush, and to my wife Martha, who is in heaven with the Lord. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you.
Very good. Very well done. Thank you. That's just fascinating to hear the stories. We do thank you very much for sharing that with us. We now welcome the Honorable Dr. Tita V. Banks. Now, when I read her qualifications, you know about him, it will become clear that I'm the one that is not like the others. Let me just tell you what Dr. Banks is about. She is a diplomat, human rights advocate, and educator. She is the national chair of the United Nations Association of the USA. The association, with its 30,000 members, is part of the World Federation of United Nations Associations. Today, Dr. Banks will inform us of the Model UN for Students, the global classrooms, and other initiatives that she advocates on behalf of the UN. Please make welcome here to the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum, Dr. Tita V. Banks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Glad that you're here, and thank you to Dr. Shirley Hammond for her leadership in organizing this magnificent experience. It's an educational experience, not only here in the U.S., but to our colleagues in Canada, and then our colleagues in India. We have UNA India involved in this, UNA Canada involved in it. We had some comments coming in from UNA Nigeria. The World Federation of UNAs are 94 countries that have United Nations associations. And within those associations, we not only have adult members, we have student members, we have young professionals, so it spans. And because when Eleanor Roosevelt established, she went around the US first, creating the United Nations Association soon after the UN was chartered. Her hope was that in order for the UN to succeed, it would take people, civic action, to push forward the mission and the vision of the UN. And so that was the beginning of it. So as we celebrate UN 75, this is a great year for the United Nations. You will see a lot of publicity around it and announcements and events happening, because this is a great celebration of a great experiment that has worked and will continue to work, and it needs to continue to work in order to bring about world peace.
My name is Rinda Songkia, and I attended Weimar, New York in 2019. Overall, my experience at Weimar was very enriching, and it really expanded my horizons by introducing me to people from all around the world and introducing me to their perspectives and their skills. In just a span of 3 days, I already felt so much more confident negotiating with 100 people. And as the delegate of the Dominican Republic, I just feel like I learned so much from the other delegates around that I was able to incorporate into my own experience. Like, for example, the delegate of Brazil, she was very, very shy and quiet, but she had some incredible ideas, and that's why she was able to bag the position of the best position paper. Similarly, the delegate of Bhutan had excellent diplomacy, understanding, and values, and that taught me that it's easier to push your objectives if you go through the right paths.
My name is Mumford Isd, and I attended Weimar, New York 2019. For me, Weimar was truly a culmination of new ideas, new perspectives, and new experiences. As a delegate of Spain, I was truly able to learn, discover, and just learn a lot about not only Spain's foreign policy, but also about the global political economy. And as part of the General Assembly debating over the future of the UN peacekeeping forces, I was able to secure an understanding of the diverse opinions of my fellow delegates, as well as of what diplomacy truly meant.
Okay. Those two students were talking about their experience with the Model UN program. Okay. Most of you have heard of the Model UN, especially our educators. We have two programs. It's the Model UN program, and it's also Global Classrooms. The Model UN program is over 60 years old. This is where we connect with you. One of the things that Eleanor Roosevelt wanted to do was say, look, the UNA has to connect people to the United Nations, not only to support the United Nations, but for every citizen to understand the importance of knowing what's going on in other countries, for knowing their part in it, for knowing how they can help make change even in their own cities, their own states, their own nations. So the Model UN program, we have it both on the high school level, the collegiate level, the middle school level. It's national in terms of the US, and then we also have an international Model UN program. And both of those, the ultimate sessions, are actually at the UN headquarters. So this gives all of you the opportunity to represent Texas and go into the Model UN program, and eventually, whether you are in high school or middle school, or even when you get to your collegiate levels, to be able to go to the United Nations headquarters and have a session there and meet the ambassadors, such as you've had the opportunity today to meet one of our esteemed ambassadors, and see how it works. So what happens there is that we train you before you go there, and even if you're doing it within your school or within your city, how to be diplomats. You learn about countries, you research those countries, and then you also find out what are some of the issues that are involved with this. We take on global issues. In the right-hand corner, you'll see all of the different color charts there. Those are the Sustainable Development Goals. In 2015, the UN, all of its member nations decided, look, we have some global issues. It's not just in foreign countries in terms of when America's looking at it, but it is also here in the US. So they agreed on 17 global goals for all of us to work on. And in many of your classrooms, you are addressing some of these. When you talk about health issues, when you talk about gender equality, when you talk about the climate. How many have been following Gretchen with the climate change advocacy and the children's movement? That's what one of her goals is, that she wants to focus on climate change, because climate change is going to affect every single person in this class. It's already affecting us, but in terms of 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. And that's why Gretchen, 15 years old, who won the Person of the Year from Time Magazine, said, look, this is our future. We have to be concerned about this. So through our Model UN programs, you study these issues, and you come up with ideas. You come up with ways by which you make the issue important to our legislators, to our parents, to our communities, so that we somehow affect the progress of it and start making some of the changes. Here you have a picture of how they study it. Each group takes on a country. You study that country so you know the perspective of that country. And then you get into debates. How are we going to solve this problem? One country may say, we want to do it this way. Another country may say, no, we want to do it this way. But then you have to negotiate. You compromise. You learn to look from other perspectives. And that's the way we talk about, you'll hear the term multilateralism. This is when countries come together and negotiate for a common good, for a common end. Because no country can do it by itself. You've heard the phrase, no man is an island. No country is an island now, because we live in a global village. What affects one directly, as Dr. King told us, affects all indirectly. So whatever is going on globally, and now one of the things that's on the news this morning, of course, is the coronavirus. What affected one overseas now is affecting 16 countries. So we are all interconnected, and that's the point of the Model UN program, is to give education, to educate young people in terms of looking at the world from a global vision, so that you see how you can make some changes and help the progress of it. These are the global goals, and education is number 4. Of course, that's what you're about, you know? And then all of these. So as you look at these, any of these can show up in any of your classrooms: the sciences, the humanities, the arts, whether we're talking about poverty, whether we're talking about energy. Okay. At the UNA, we've also developed what we call mini simulations on an app, an Apple app, because the Model UN program generally takes about a day to 3 days. Our Global Classrooms program, that's for the entire semester. So schools have an option of how the students will participate. You can do sessions in a 45-minute class session, or if your school wants to be involved and go into the citywide session, that's a 1-day session, and in some cities it's a 3-day session. But it's any amount of time. It can be modified to assist you. And these are some of the issues that have already been discussed. And as I said, the last one is a pandemic, right? And that's what we're dealing with today in real life as we're listening to the news and what's going on. So how are all of these countries going to handle the coronavirus? You know, what are the policies that are going to be made? What is one country going to say? I'm going to close my borders to this other country. The other country is saying, well, we need resources. So that's where this communication, negotiation, and cooperation among countries is so vital. These are some of the ways when you break into your discussion and during the Model UN session, is discussion of particular issues or a discussion as a committee of the UN, because you simulate that. Some of you would be on the Security Council. Some of you would be on the World Health Organization group. And you would have these sessions with other members, other students, all of whom are separate, representing different countries. That on the left, that's our group just having fun at the end. But what's important about that photo is you see that we are on all levels. That's a photo of our collegiate members. The collegiate members serve as the secretariat for the middle school and the high school members. So every level is teaching the next level. And that makes it a whole lot of fun because most of you don't want to hear me talk all the time. You want to hear somebody from the high school or someone from the college talk, and then they can talk and make fun a lot more interesting things some kind of way. And you see, this is a group that really had great fun. That particular group, the young lady that's in the center, she went through Model UN at middle school level. She stayed with it at high school level. She then went to college. She then joined our board at UNA Houston, and now she is in law school, and she intends to go into international affairs. The app that we have for our Model UN is called Become an Ambassador, and you can see this on our website. But what we do is give lesson plans to teachers and templates, and we provide a lot of resources so that if your school wanted to host a Model UN, if your class wanted to do a mini simulation, you have the resources right there on the website. See, we have our countries represented by the flags, and then the students are doing their discussions. So this is what we do at the Model UN. At the UNA, we have two major purposes, education and advocacy. In the most recent time, we've spent a lot more time in terms of our adult sessions on advocacy. We want full funding of the United Nations. We want multilateralism to be the premise of how we cooperate with other nations. On the education side, our key program is Model UN and Global Classrooms. And so everyone is welcome. It's a free program. You just go to our website and join us. And then the whole school benefits. Even if one class participates in it, you can share that with the rest of the school. And sometimes when we have, because Texas is one of the most diverse states. We know Houston is the most diverse city in the nation. But if we then say, okay, all of our students, if you can look back in terms of your lineage, what countries are you interested in? What countries do any of your relatives represent or come from? And see how they're doing, and how do all of these countries come in together? How do they make up our great community? And what are our concerns about those countries? So that's the excitement of it. Okay. The picture way on the left is in June, many of our Global Classroom students meet in Washington. So we meet at the United Nations when we have our Model UN, but then we're able to take students to Washington, and they go into the halls of the Congress. They meet with the congressional people, the House representatives, the senators, and they promote the future of the UN. And right now we're saying we want full funding of the UN. We want United States to be a leader at the United Nations. The UN is based here in America, so we certainly want to keep our position in terms of being leaders in the UN and its mission. And then, of course, it's pointing to our future. So this is a bit about what we do at the Model UN and the Global Classrooms, and I'd like to just ask Dr. Gear to stand up one more time. She is with Educate, and she is on our board at the UNA Houston. In terms of our we have a lot of educators that are among us, and we really take this seriously, and we're just so glad, Dr. Hammond, to have this opportunity to meet with the students here, tell you the possibilities. You have the program for the India, which introduces you to President Bush's trip to India and how that interacts, and then you have all of these learning resources. As you drove up, there's a quote that's on the wall of the building that faces you. And it says, and this is by President Bush, he says, "Let future generations understand the burden and blessings of freedom." That's what this is about. So you are the current generation, but we're also looking 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, 40 years down the line. And you know what? It's going to start with you. And your experience here today is going to catapult you into different areas, so that you see all of the opportunities that are available, and you also realize the importance of becoming global citizens. Thank you.
It's up to the country. They can make the decision.
We can't have peace unless both sides want to have peace. Austria,
The United Kingdom, Philippines,
the Russian Federation.
Today, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice spoke to a model UN forum which is designed to teach teenagers about diplomacy.
I think you have a better sense of how hard it is to make all of the trade-offs in diplomacy, how hard it is to reconcile the interests of different parts, and perhaps you have a little bit more understanding for people who are trying to make good decisions in international relations.
I've gotten to know so much about world politics and international relations.
It's a chance to learn how other people think and how other countries work and how their governing systems function.
This is a very diverse group of kids from all around the world, and it's interesting how we all relate to each other.
How to speak, how to debate, how to present yourself, how to think through an argument.
Jordan, Lebanon, Slovenia.
It seems as if the resolution fails to touch on a lot of important and vital subjects.
It gives students the opportunity to network with each other. And I believe that networking is the best way that you can have any type of global conflict resolved.
We should not use any forceful measure unless pushed to the corner where we have no alternative but that.
We are the only resolution that is really talking about documents that are already existent.
Their government is against torture, but they turn their head and look the other way when torture does happen.
UNAUSA, through their global classrooms, provide young people with communication and leadership skills, an understanding of international affairs, and most important, they help to strengthen their voices in shaping those world affairs. The more young people know of other cultures and international issues, the more they bring understanding and tolerance to the world at large.
Thank you, Dr. Banks. We're talking about potential leaders of tomorrow. I'm just going to take a sidebar before we go live to Ottawa, Canada, New York, and to Ohio. It wasn't that long ago, and there are probably parents in the room right now that can attest to this, but do you remember the Dick Tracy cartoons? Anybody remember Dick Tracy at all? Comic books or cartoons? I mean, students here will not, but Dick Tracy always talked to this item on his arm, and it was a watch that he talked into. And you're thinking, well, that's never going to happen. And now in our lifetime, we see that there is indeed a watch like that. So for those of you in this generation, I can't imagine what this world's going to be by 20 to 30 years, be like in 20 to 30 years from now. What kind of technology is going to emerge? But I do know this. Good leaders are in short supply right now in my generation. Good leaders are needed in the next generation. So take advantage of whatever tools are at your disposal. I wish I had done more to prepare myself to perhaps take a bigger role, but now is the time to get involved because someone is going to have to take the place of the current generation to make sure that this is a great world to live in and remain the strongest country in the world. All right, let's go live now. We are going to say hello to our friends, and we're going to, what they're going to do is ask some questions. And I would ask those that are along the lines in the network here that you would speak clearly, as your teachers have probably told you, but they have some questions for the ambassador here and for Dr. Banks as well. So we will first go live to Ottawa, Canada. The location is the United Nations Association in Ottawa, 5-generation SDG Youth Ambassadors organized by Sarah Cambites, Senior Director for Programs and Innovation. Where are you guys right now? Can you wave to us? We're on the big screen. There you are. All right. So all the way from Ottawa, Canada. So let's go with your first question, I believe, for Ambassador Sichan C.
So my name is Olivia. I'm in grade 11 at Lizard Collegiate Institute. I'm currently working on SDG number 13, which is climate action. And my question is, what is the hardest part about being an ambassador to the UN?
Thank you for that question. The hard part is only when you think it's hard. For the United States, we are blessed with three things in our relation with the United Nations. First, we are the co-founder, as President Bush said in his opening remarks at the UNGA in 1990, that we were among the co-founders of the United Nations in 1945. Second thing, we are the host country. New York is the world's largest diplomatic community. And third, we are the largest manufacturer to many United Nations programs, everything from what I call from cradle to coffin, from children all the way to aging and everything in between, human rights, HIV, AIDS, food crisis, famine, and so on. So we are there at the top. We are doing this not to be popular, but we are doing this because we are Americans, because we are a compassionate society. And I'm happy that Canada is always with us on this work for global peace. President Bush, as you have read, you heard from previous readers, that he developed enormous personal relationships with these people. And I don't know if you pay attention to the video at the beginning. The Secretary General of the time was Javier Perez de Cuellar, who was Peruvian ambassador to the UN when George Bush was US ambassador. And now, at that time, in 1990, George Bush became president, and Perez de Cuellar was Secretary General of the United Nations. So these personal relationships make the job much, much easier. We all have national interests. We all are there to defend our national interests, but we have to find a common ground. And that would be the hard part. You think that is a hard part of your job, is to find a common ground. China has a national interest. Russia has a national interest. We have a lot of differences, but it's important for us to work together. So we may disagree on issue, but we should not be disagreeable.
Okay, we have one more question for Dr. Steve, correct?
Good day, Ambassador Steve and company. My name is Aryan, and I'm a grade 12 student at Colonel By Secondary School. I'm working on SDG number 13, Climate Action, concerning green transportation in the community. My question to you is, what would a typical day in the life of a nation's UN ambassador resemble in general?
They can't hear very well here. He says, what is a typical day in the life of a nation's UN ambassador in general?
Well, first you get up early enough to be at the office early, to read all the information that are coming through your desk. We are blessed with a lot of information that we are able to get. And then we have meetings. We have the ambassadors meeting, and then we have the staff meeting. And then at 10 o'clock, we'll hit the United Nations. Our mission is just across the street from the United Nations, so all you have to do is to go down and walk across First Avenue to the United Nations. So it normally takes me about 7 minutes from desk to my first meeting at the United Nations. In preparation of that, we have a lot of phone calls to make. I like to learn more about my colleagues, and not just about their policies, but about their life, about their personal life. Do they play tennis? Do their children that go to school in the United States? Is one of them going to Columbia, which is my alma mater? So I want to have all of these together so that when I talk to them, I have something that I can relate personally. And George Bush is very good with that, and I learned a lot from him. I sort of took his textbook of diplomacy and leadership that I follow very religiously all in my life. So it's meetings, meetings, and meetings. And then you have to eat and drink for your country because there are a lot of reception. You have breakfast meeting, you have lunch meeting, you have dinner meeting, cocktails, and so on and so forth. So you not only that you have a good tailored suit, but you have to have a strong stomach and, and a good liver.
So, That's adult humor on that last comment there. So I'm curious. First of all, Ottawa, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to switch to Dr. Tita Banks for the next round of questions. I have to ask him a question, though. First, when you say you ate, was it like McDonald's and chicken fingers, or did you have a nice catered type meal?
It depends. And if you have a candidate running for an election or something, and you want to lobby them, then you take them to a very good restaurant.
Got it. All right.
And also, if you know New York well, there's a restaurant called Francis Tavern.
Okay.
That's where George Washington bid his farewell to his officer after he finished his presidency. So I took many of my colleagues there to Francis Tavern, which is probably one of the few restaurants dated from the 18th century, and there are a lot of history. So we have a lot of things to break the ice, so to speak. Yeah.
And there are a lot of us in the room, there are adults especially, saying if you ate that much, how you stay that thin. We're impressed. Let's go back to Ottawa now for some questions for Dr. Tita V. Banks.
Hi there, good day. My name is Claudia, and I am a grade 12 student at Colonel Vi, just like Aryan. And I've been working on poverty in Ottawa recently. And my question is, what inspired you to become part of the UN and its agenda?
It says, what inspired you to become part of the UN and its agenda?
Oh, thank you, Paula, for the question, and I'm so glad UNA Canada is able to join us. I was with the UNA Canada president in China, and when we had our executive committee meeting of the 94 countries, and before I get to the answer, what I emphasized was that this is a way that we can make changes, we can make progress people to people, even though there may be barriers country to country. So that's the importance of this, so we're so glad. My interest in the United Nations really started when I was in middle school, because we had a trip to New York to visit the UN headquarters. And from that point on, I always wanted to do something internationally. So I took a whole lot of languages in high school to make sure, and then I selected a college that would allow me to study abroad. But if I back up before that, I'm originally from Liberia in West Africa, and the UN has helped Liberia over the years, for many years. And so seeing all of the history that was going on and watching what the UN was doing, watching what was going on in different countries, I kept abreast in terms of what was going on internationally. When I got out of college, then I did work in education and worked with the government. And when I went to Philadelphia, there was a delegation of ambassadors that came to Philadelphia. I was working in the mayor's office there. And the ambassador of Liberia said, we need to have a consulate in Philadelphia. And they knew of my work, and so they asked me to take on that position. Because of that position, I then reached out to the United Nations Association in Philadelphia, and I reached out to the World Affairs Council, and I reached out to other international organizations that were in the region, because I, as a professional at that point, needed to get involved in it. And so that began my association just with the UN Association. Now with the United Nations, that started, as I said, from childhood. And what's interesting, and for all of you, you never know where your roads will lead. So here I was coming as a child from Liberia, where the UN had helped the country in its development stage, full circle to the point where I then became representative of that country to acquire additional assistance for the country during its time of civil war. So just as the ambassador talked about war in Southeast Asia, there was war in West Africa. And so I became a part of that, and a part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that helped bring about peace there. So you never know where you're going to end up, but all of these experiences, like the experiences that your students are having today, take that in so that as you go forward. And one thing that I had forgotten, and I'm not sure how I forgot it, but we had our high school class reunion a couple of years ago. I won't tell you the number of years, but lo and behold, I opened up the class book, and there I am sitting for the Model UN. So I had done Model UN in high school also. So that was my consent. So at this point, because of my diplomatic connection and because of the issues that are so pertinent today and urgent, that maintains my association and my interest with the UN as well as the UNA.
All right. We have one more question for you. And by the way, I hope your 10th year class reunion went really
Great.
well when you were there. That's very nice. Let's go with our next question from Ottawa.
Hi, ma'am. My name is Mishkura. I'm a grade 11 student at Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and I'm working on climate action and responsible consumption. And my question for you is, why do you think it's important that youth get involved with UN programs and issues? Thank you.
Okay, why do I think everyone should get involved?
No, I think you've answered part of that in your talk, but why is it important to have youth get involved in these
Oh,
programs?
for young? Oh, yes, 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 yes. Listen, if we look around globally, historically, when we have seen major movements that have changed the course of a nation, when we have seen major movements that have changed social policies, if we look at the civil rights movement, it was young people at the forefront. Yes, you heard about Martin Luther King Jr., you heard about Mrs. Rosa Parks, but in Birmingham, they were young people your age who marched in the streets, who went to jail because the parents couldn't afford to be in jail. So the strategy was let the children march, and then we could get this message out that we need equality in this nation. If we look at other countries, universities are the ones that usually are the ones that are monitored first. I was getting ready to say shut down in some cases. But when there are young ideas, new ideas, they are coming from our younger generation. So that's why it's important for you at your level now to start paying attention to what's going on. Have ideas about these issues. We're talking about the global goals. That's going to be your future. You have to be a partner in that. Okay?
Okay, next question.
Hi. My name is Zoe. I'm a grade 11 student at Lisgar Collegiate Institute, which is just down the street from here. And I'm actually like the club head of my school's Model UN. And I was just wondering if to what extent your country and like youth is involved in working to kind of support the sustainable development goals of the UN.
Yes. All of what we're encouraging as our UN 75 kickoff, and our theme is for all levels to be involved in some aspect of the global goals or the sustainable development goals. We have students who are working on climate change. We have other students who are working with our Girl Up program, which is part of the UN Foundation, on gender equality, education equality. We're working on students who are looking at we talked about the water issue, but also the energy issue. In terms of poverty, we have students who are going to food banks and assisting there. So all of those 17, we're not asking everyone to do all of them, but different groups, different schools, different classes have taken on a particular project to have some impact on that particular goal.
Okay, we have time for one more brief question from Ottawa before we go to New York. So your final question.
Dr. Banks, I just wanted to thank you and Ambassador Siv too for being with us today. Our last question is just for the U.S. specifically, what are some strengths and challenges unique to your country that you find it faces when it comes to achieving sustainable development goals?
Okay.
The challenges and, some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. The opportunities are that we have all of these 17 goals that people at any level, any age can help make a change in. The challenges, people's interest, okay, people realizing that these are important issues, and also, of course, we have policies, and how do we, and the time it takes to get policies changed. So as long as we keep working on the issues, we know that certain areas such as policy change will take a certain amount of time, but still we can do something each day to help in any of the sustainable development goals.
All right. Thank you very much to Ottawa. Let's give a round of applause to Ottawa for joining us long distance today. We will now go to the 4th grade class at Hewlett Windermere Public Schools in New York. The distance learning coordinator there is Serena Hall. So Hewlett Windermere Public Schools in New York. Can we shift over to get their signal there? Ohio is the only one we've had. Oh, there you are. Well, welcome back, New York. It's been a while. Good to see you guys. Thanks for paying attention. We know it's a long time to be part of this program, but hopefully you got a snack along the way or some kind of a reward there. Let's go to Ambassador Siv now because someone has a question for him. Who's going to ask the first question from Hewlett-Woodmere Public Schools in New York. Who's going to do that?
My name is. Question is, what was President most passionate about?
What was President Bush, and we're running a little short on time, just FYI, what was President Bush most passionate about?
He was very passionate about public service. He emphasized the importance of service to others. He said any definition of a successful life must include service to others. So that has been part of his persona from the beginning. And so he went to join the Navy when he was 18 years old. He was the youngest Navy pilot all the way until his death in 2018. So serving others, that's the most passion.
So it wasn't Barbara? I thought it was Barbara all these years.
Behind a good man, there's a great woman.
Right, exactly. All right, another question from New York. Who has the next one for us?
Hello, my name is Ryan, and my question is, what did President Bush and Mrs. Bush want their legacy to represent?
What did the President and Mrs. Bush want their legacy to represent?
You know, they were not very, they were very concerned about the word, the L word, you know, the word legacy. And President Bush once said that let's historians and other people define their legacy. But I have been with them for quite a long time. I started with Mrs. Bush. She wanted people to be able to read, and it's very sad that in America there's 36 million Americans who cannot read. So the Barbara Bush Foundation just had its 30th anniversary in Washington in November, and they have given out almost $100 million to all the programs around the country, and we need to do more. So reading is very important for Mrs. Bush, and for President Bush, as I mentioned a minute ago, it's service to others.
Exactly. All right, another question from New York, our last one from there.
Hi, my name is Bia, and my question is, what was the hardest decision President Bush had to make?
What was the hardest decision President Bush had to make?
If you ever come to College Station, please come to the museum. There's an exhibition on the Gulf War, and that is a picture of President Bush walking in the Rose Garden after he was going to decide that he would send our young people to liberate Kuwait from the Iraqi occupation. He said there is no, that is the hardest decision that he would have to make, is to send our young people to war, knowing that there would be casualties.
Yeah, and for those of you that have been in the library to the right, I call it the situation picture from the Oval Office where Dick Cheney is there, and they're talking about these issues as well. Fascinating question. Hewlett-Woodmere, you have been awesome to join us today all the way to College Station, Texas. Thank you for those great questions. Guys, let's give a round of applause to our friends in New York. Thank you. Very nice. All right, we were unable to make the connection from Zanesville, Ohio. I have a feeling they are watching on live stream and listening, but they can't speak back to us, so we will ask on their behalf. They're 7th graders from Franklin Public School, and the distance learning coordinator there is Leslie Charles. For Ambassador Sichan, what contribution to the UN that you and or President Bush made are you most proud of?
I think President Bush, the father, the son?
It just says the president. So.
Okay, let me start with myself first. I'm proud to say that during my time there, it was 5 years there, we have not lost an election. We ran for something. We got our people elected to this committee, that committee. That's because we are well equipped and we started our campaign early on. We worked at their capitals, we worked in Washington, and we worked in New York. And I mentioned a minute ago about eating and drinking for your country. That's when we started lobbying, invite all these people, making sure that we are serious about this candidate, that he should be on this committee, and that the United States should be on that commission. So it's very important to start working early and start maintaining the relationship strong. When I was there for 5 years, each time I walk in, my colleagues from 192 countries look at me and they saw you. They saw America. They saw her greatness, her future. Each time I pronounce on behalf of the President and people of the United States, that was my proudest moment.
Great. Next it says, how did the relationships President Bush build as the UN ambassador aid him in his presidency?
It's a very good question. I went to the museum yesterday. Each time I'm here, I always go to the museum and I pick up something new. Before he decided to send our troops to liberate Kuwait from the Iraqi occupation, he exhausted all kinds of diplomatic avenue, and UN Security Council Resolution 678, that was the key one. They adopted the resolution by unanimous decision, which is quite rare, at the United Nations. So he decided to move. In January, he sent our Air Force to bomb the Iraqi installations. And that's going back to his personal relationship. A friend of mine, Jason Tamai, he wrote that Bush always writes notes because he used the word, write notes, win votes.
Right.
It can also mean that you keep the relationship alive. And I have a lot of notes from him, and he's so personal, he's so down to earth, and that is a blessing to be able to learn from him.
Got it. And our final question today before we wrap up is, this is pretty fascinating, what other world leader did you and President Bush form a mutual relationship with that still aids our country to this day?
Well, 30 years ago, the leadership have changed, but I want to single out a few. Canada, at the national service at the National Cathedral in Washington on December 5th, I think Brian Mulroney was the only foreign leaders who came to eulogize him. We had good relationship with Canada and the UK, of course. And we have our allies in Europe and Asia, Japan and Korea and so on and so forth. It's very important to keep the friendship, personal friendship strong. But from generation to generation, that was carried on.
Got it. And finally, for me, does the traffic in Washington, D.C. remind you of the traffic in Pampa? Doubtful?
Thank you for asking that.
No,
Mike.
it's not legit. I just was throwing that out there.
I was able to escape through the jungle in Cambodia without compasses. I had nothing to guide me except the sun, the moon, and the stars. I was going through the jungle for 3 days, but I got lost in Pampa. Seriously.
That's right.
I get lost in Pampa, I go to San Antonio.
After you've escaped from the jungles of Cambodia, that Washington, D.C. traffic's nothing to you. Nothing. I get it. Yeah. Let's give another round of applause to our panelists today. Good mercy.
Thank you.
Very nice. Wow. All right. Special thanks to our contributions to the program by the Ambassador, the UN Ambassador for the United States, and the Honorable Dr. Tita Banks, who's United States National Chair of the United Nations Association. Student readers from Mumford, thank you for being here. Jane Long Intermediate, the International Leadership of Texas and College Station. Students that participated in New York, Ottawa, and Ohio, we thank you for being here today. Reading does provide you with exciting ways to discover new adventures, so we ask that you once again would consider downloading Presidential Travel Mission India, an action-packed and action-paced game while learning about modern India and diplomacy. Have fun reading. We do thank you very much. It has been an honor that you've invested our time in this program today. Thank you so much for being here to the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum. Have a great rest of the day. Be safe going back. Thank you. Good night.